Welcome students in the new session of research methodology. I am Professor Rishi from Shri Vishwakarma Skill University. I am Professor of Pedagogy and Capacity Building, and for the last 3 or 4 sessions we are discussing about various different factors of research conduction. We started with the problem, then we were talking about objectives and hypotheses, and then we discussed about literature review in detail, and then we were talking about research design, and today we will talk about sampling technique. Sampling is one of the very significant activity of research conduction, and specifically in the quantitative kind of research, where we need to collect data and then how data will be processed, and what should be the mode of data collection. All these factors will be influenced by sampling technique. So, before I discuss about sampling technique, let us first discuss about sample, and even prior to sample there is need to discuss about population. In research methodology, population means the specific target group on which research is to be conducted, or in other words, it is set of subjects or objects which is selected for conduction of the research, and this can be understood with the help of an example. Suppose I want to conduct a research on the topic impact of any government policy on the population, and example is, suppose we want to conduct the research on the topic impact of free education policy to girls on the education of girls education. So, in that the target population is the girls, but it is very difficult to take the whole lot of population in our sample. So, to specify it particularly, depending upon the size, type and nature of the research, we will specify the population. Suppose in this respect we want to conduct this study for Delhi city only, and in Delhi city also we have taken some of the educational institution or some of the geographical areas on which we try to find out the impact of education policy of free education on the girls education. So, here that specified geographical area or the academic institutions, their inmates or people living in the particular geographical area will be considered as population for the study. So, this is population. Population is also known as universe for the study. Universe and population are considered as the synonym in research methodology. So, once we have finalized the population, then it would be decided whether we will go for census study or sample study. Now, what is census study? Census study is when whole of the population is taken into consideration for the conduction of the research, whereas the sample study is where a particular unit or some of the subjects from the population are selected for conduction of the study. So, that kind of study is known as the sample study. So, when the size of population is very not large, as well as the expenditure, time consumption and other factors are not very huge for conduction of the research, then in that case we can go for the census study. And example of that is, suppose we want to conduct a study on polar bears, and suppose there are only 100 polar bears, and they are living in a specified not very wide geographical area, then in that case we can go for the census study. Whereas, if the geographical area has increased to the large extent, or if it is not possible to identify all the polar bear living in a particular geographical area, then in that case we can go for sample study. So, simply understanding, the census study is when all the subjects of population are taken into consideration for conduction of the research study, that is for collection of data. Whereas, in case of sample study, we go for a particular unit, or we select some of the subjects from the whole population for conduction of the study, and then the findings are generalized, implemented on the whole population. So, here we could understand what is population, what is census study, what is sampling study. Now, if we have understood the sampling study, then in that case, now how we should take the sample, or in other words, let us try to understand what is sample. Sample is selection of some of the subjects or objects from the population, and then conducting the study, conducting the research on them by collecting data related to the research from these subjects or objects. Here there is need to understand the difference between subjects and objects also. Subjects are most of the time considered as living beings, whereas objects are the non-living being. Suppose we want to conduct a study on the products of a manufacturing organizations, then the particular population which is taken into consideration for conduction of study will be known as the objects. Whereas, if we want to conduct the study on living beings, as we took the example of impact of free education policy of government on the women, then in that case the population will be consist of subjects, or simply subjects are the living beings, whereas objects are the non-living being. Now, sample is the set of objects or subjects taken from the identified population for research. In the sample from the population, we select by using the randomized method or non-randomized method for conduction of the study. Now, we have coined two more new concepts, that is randomized and non-randomized. So, if we want to take a sample, there should be some technique, and these techniques may be the randomized technique or non-randomized, and it may also be known as the probability sampling or non-probability sampling. Again, in research methodology, randomization is synonym to the probability sampling, whereas non-randomization is synonym to the non-probability sampling. Now, what is probability sampling? In the probability sampling, each and every subject or object of population taken for research conduction will be given equal chance to become part of the sample. Whereas, in the non-randomized sampling, the sampling may or may not be of the form where equal chance is given to all the subjects or objects of the study population. So, randomized sampling is the sampling where equal chance is given to all the subjects or objects to become part of the sample, whereas non-randomized is when the situation, circumstances or type of study does not allow to give equal chance to all the subjects or objects to become part of the study. So, that is non-randomized. Here I want to clarify about the target population and population also. The reason being, if you will not understand the difference between these two, then sometimes it would be confusing what is population for us and what is target population for us. As we had taken the example of free education policy of government for girls education, in that case all the girls of India are the population. But as I told you, whenever the size of population is very large and it is not possible to take the whole lot or all the subjects or object of population into the study, then in that case we specify the population. And as I told you in the beginning of this session, that for that reason we will specify the population with respect to the geographical area, with respect to the numbers, with respect to the certain organizations or other factors, because it is not possible sometimes because of the large population to take all the subjects or objects into consideration. That would be a very costly affair, time consuming affair, effort needing affair. So, in that case a smaller portion of population is taken as sample and then study is conducted on that, and then its findings are generalized on the population. So, now we have clarified the population is the whole lot of subjects or objects which can be included in the study. Target population is the population specifically identified from among the largest population for conduction of the study. How we can understand? Again let us take example of impact of free education policy on the girl education. So, for the researcher it was not possible to take all the girls from throughout India in the conduction of study. So, the researcher decided that he will conduct the study for only 2 or 3 states. Let us take example of Delhi, Haryana and Punjab. Lastly, the researcher has selected that. But even in this the smaller portion of India, it is not possible to include all the girls living among these 3 states. So, further the researcher will specify the population, and in that case the researcher may specify it with respect to the district of these 3 states or any other criteria. So, ultimately whatever population in aggregate has been specified and identified by the researcher for conduction of the research, that particular will be known as the target population. So, the population is the complete set of all the subject and objects taken for research conduction, whereas the target population is the population which is considered specifically for conduction of the research, and out of this target population sample will be taken. Already I have explained what is sample. Now, as I already told you that there can be 2 methods of sample selection. The first one is randomized sampling and the second one is the non-randomized sampling. And for the randomized, I told you that in the randomized kind of sampling, each and every subject or object of target population will get equal chance to become part of the sample, whereas in the non-randomized sampling, each and every subject and object will not get equal opportunity to become part of the research, or in other words, the researcher may be subjective in selection of the subject or object. Now, why we should go for randomized or non-randomized, and what is difference between them, and what is importance and which one is better? So, let us start from the better. Randomized means we are giving equal chance. Equal chance means the replica of population, or in other words, the sample will be replica or will be the exact representation of the population. If we want to bring the exact findings or the correct findings, there is one of the mandatory condition that the sample taken should be the exact replica or representation of the population. If there will be any kind of biasness, then in that case the finding will not be the same, or it would not be possible to generalize the findings on the whole population. So, in case of randomization, we are giving equal chance to all the subject. It means if we will take a sample by using any kind of criteria for randomization, the sample would be the exact representation or replica of the population, and in that case there would be highest possibility of exact findings. Whereas in the case of non-randomized sampling, there will be difference, that there may or may not be selection of such a sample which would be exact replica or representation of our population, and in that case the possibilities of exact and correct finding will be very weak. So, this is reason for which we should go for. Suppose we want to go for exact finding, then in that case it is experimental design, and in the experimental design, as it has already been shared with the student in another session, that one of the mandatory condition for conduction of research with experimental design, reason being experimental design is one of the most effective design for bringing the exact findings, and the 4 characteristics or dimensions which are necessary to observe in the experimental design are: number 1, the researcher must have freedom to manipulate the independent variable. Second, there should be possibility of treatment in the experimental design. And third, there should be treatment group and control group. And fourth, the sample should be randomized. All these 4 characteristics will help the researcher to bring the exact or correct findings. So, the randomization of sampling is one of the mandatory and necessary element for research conduction if we want to bring the exact findings. Now, what are different types of randomized and non-randomized sampling? In the probability or randomized sampling, there are 4 different types. Number 1 is simple random, number 2 systematic random, number 3 stratified random, and number 4 cluster random sampling. Whereas in the non-random sampling or non-probability sampling, in the non-probability sampling, there the types are the purposive or judgmental sampling, quota sampling, snowball sampling, and yes, of course, sometimes it is reliance or available subjects sampling type. So, let us start first with the purposive sampling. What is purposive sampling? Purposive sampling is a type or classification of non-probability sampling, where the sample is selected on the basis of the objective of study for fulfilling the purpose of study, and in this type the sampling may be judgmental, selective and subjective. Now, let us try to understand all that. What is judgmental? As I told you that there might be certain researches where it is not possible to identify the whole lot of population, or among other situations, it is not possible to reach to all the subjects of population. Suppose we want to conduct the study on the loins in India. Population may be not very large, but it is scattered all over the map of Indian geography. So, it is very difficult to access as well as to identify this population. But even then, if researcher want to conduct the research, then in that case researcher subjectively, judgmentally can select certain geographical area or some of the geographical area of the whole country, from the whole country, and then the sample can be taken from there. This is one of the reason. Second reason for not, sometimes even population is not identified. Let us take example of we want to conduct a study on HIV patients. It is not possible to locate each and every HIV patient in a specific geographic area. Even sometimes it is not known to the person itself that whether person is HIV infected or not. Then in that case it is difficult to consider or to identify the complete set of people suffering from HIV. So, in that case there is need to go for non-randomized or non probability kind of sampling, and the method of purposive sampling is we want to identify the HIV cases. So, whosoever can help the researcher to serve the purpose or to attain the objective will be included in the study. So, this kind of sampling technique is purposive sampling. Second type of non-probability sampling or non-randomized sampling is the quota sampling. Quota sampling is again a non-probability kind of sampling in which researcher can constitute or form a sample by involving the subjects or object which represent a population and are selected because of their certain characteristic, quality or trait. That quality, that trait, that characteristic will decide or will inform about the quota. Quota means the subjects or objects which are having a specific trait, quality or the characteristics, and in this case researcher can decide the trait on which the subsets can be identified. Suppose we want to conduct the research on the leadership, and we want to conduct the research on leadership by involving the political leader, the religious leader and the social leader, cultural leader and the spiritual leader or the religious leaders. So, these spiritual, political and religious are the specific traits. On the basis of that quota can be set, and then from this particular quota or this particular set of subjects a sample can be taken. So, that kind of sampling is the quota sampling. The next type of sampling technique under the category of non-probability sampling or non-randomized sampling is the snowball sampling. The word snowball is having a specific characteristic, and because of that it has been taken as name of one of the type of sampling technique in non-probability or non-randomized sampling technique. If we go to the hilly area and if there is snow, if there is lot of snow, and if we take a handful of snow and we convert it into a ball and then if we roll that ball on the snow on the ground, and if that ball is rolling for a long distance, gradually the size of that snowball will get increased as a result of sticking of new snow to the snowball prepared by the person who has rolled down the snowball. Do you know what is reason for that? Because the snow will roll on the snow and the particles of snow will get sticked and it will become larger in the size. The same process is being used while taking the sample in the type of snowball sampling. As I told you that in some of the research studies, it is not possible to identify or locate the research population. And in such kind of researches, by any way, if we can find out some of the subjects or objects, specifically the subjects, then we can take the data from these, and by asking from them for the similar kind of subjects, we can know some more subjects, and then we will go to the next, and these new subjects will again inform us about some more, and by this way gradually we will select or we will identify the optimum or the declared number of subjects in the sample. It can be better understood with the help of one example, and that example is, again, if we want to conduct a study on the patients of AIDS or those who are HIV positive, and for that purpose, suppose either we have approached to some hospital or to some HIV counseling center or to some HIV or AIDS testing center, we will go there, and from there we can get data. And once we will get data, then we can approach to the subjects, and from these subjects we can take information of other subjects, and these other subjects will again help us to inform about the next set of the HIV patients, and by this way we can form a set of sample for conduction of the study. So, these were some of the types of non-randomized sampling techniques. Now, let us talk about the randomized or probability sampling technique, and in this already I have told you that there are four major types, that is simple random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling and cluster sampling. So, now let us discuss about the simple random sampling. In the simple random sampling, population should not be very large, or in other words, whenever we will have a smaller population, suppose we want to conduct the study on the students of a school or a college or a university. So, the sample size is not larger. Suppose the total number of students in the college is 3000, and out of that we have to take a sample of 600. So, in that case we can go for the lottery draw, or by using some computer softwares, these 600 students be taken from the lot of 3000 students studying in the university. And how it can be done? The simplest method is, the roll numbers of these students can be written on the chits, and all these roll numbers can be put in a sack, and then this sack can be reshuffled, or the chits bearing the numbers or roll numbers of the students will be reshuffled, and then someone may be asked to put out 600 chits out of this sack. Then this is one of the method of simple random sampling. Again, I want to emphasize that in case of simple random sampling, the population should be a smaller one, it should not be large. Only in that case the random sampling technique can be used. The second type of randomized or probability sampling is the systematic sampling. In the systematic sampling, the members or subjects or objects for research conduction are selected from a larger population according to a random starting point and a fixed periodic interval. A random started point and a fixed periodic interval. Now, let us try to understand. Let us again take example of the university students of 3000, and out of that we have to take a sample of 600 students. So, what we can do, from among the number 1 to 1 to 9, we will pick up any number randomly. Suppose we have taken the number 7. Now, we have to take a sample of 6000. 6000 means out of a population of 3000. So, what we will do to find out the fixed periodic interval, we will divide the population by the size of sample. Here the size of population is 3000, whereas the size of sample is 600. So, 3000 will be divided by 600, and by this way the periodic interval is 50. It means the random number selected was 7. So, out of these 3000 students, if they are allotted number from 1 to 3000, then the random number was 7 and the fixed periodic number will be 50. So, the first subject from this population of 3000, for the selection of 600 students, the very first student who is having roll number 7 or allotted number 7, then we will add 50 to it. The next student will be the student bearing the number 57, then 107, then 157, then 207, and by this way lastly up to the 2900 and 957 will be the last. So, this is technique of taking a systematic sample in the randomized sampling technique. Simply we will pick up any number and we will find out the interval. Interval can be found out by dividing the population number by the size of sample or number of subjects or object decided for taking the sample. By this way we will get the interval. It is not necessary we will take number from 1 to 9 only. We can take number from any other. We can take from 1 to 100 also. Suppose we are taking a number 27, then by adding 50 we can take the whole load. So, this is systematic. Next one is stratified random sampling. Stratified means, stratified random sampling is method of sampling which involves the division of population into smaller groups known as strata. In stratified, we will subdivide the given population into certain groups, and in stratified random sampling or stratification, the stratas are formed based on member shared attributes. In population, there are people which are having different attributes. Now, again let us take example of the same research that we want to study the impact of free education policy on the education of girls in India. Now, if we take example of girls, in that case girls might be having different sections or communities. Sections or communities means the girls which are living in urban, semi-urban and rural, the girls which are rich, poor, the girls which are belonging to the family which are already educated and not educated. So, by this way the group of girls can be constituted, and from these groups samples can be taken. So, this is form of stratified random sampling. And the last type of sampling technique in randomized sampling is cluster sampling. In the cluster sampling, it is further extension of stratified random sampling. In this, the area can be divided geographically or with respect to other factors, and then among them groups can be constituted, and those groups will be known as the cluster. Cluster sampling, researcher divides the population into separate groups called clusters, and these clusters are not divided on the basis of their characteristics or their disposition only. They may be classified with respect to their geographical or other features, and then these will be considered as cluster. And how it can be understood? Suppose we want to conduct the research again on the same topic of studying the impact of free education policy on the education of girls in India. If we want to conduct this study on India level, then the population is very large. In that case, the cluster can be considered as the state and union territories of India, whereas the strata can be considered the girls having various demographical factors, and by this way the cluster sampling can be completed. And already we have discussed about the need of sampling, and now talking about the sample size. And in the sample size, it will depend upon the type, size, nature of the research, as well as what kind of objective and hypothesis has been decided for the research, that will decide about the sample size. Generally, there are two techniques. One is, there is a formula which is given on your screen, which can be used for calculation of sample size when the population is not infinite. Whereas when population is infinite or unknown to the researcher, then in that case the second method is, already prepared population table are available. These population tables can be used for finalizing the sample size. Before we close this session, let me explain you that in case of randomized sampling, the simple random sampling will have a very small size of population. In the second, that is stratified random sampling, the size of population would be larger than as it was in the case of simple random sampling. The next, that is stratified kind of sampling technique, the size of population may be very large, and yes, of course, the cluster stratified type of randomized sampling can contain a much more larger size of population, and by this way we can finalize the sampling technique, we can finalize the sample size, which I have already told you, and by finalizing the sample size, this research sample can be finalized and study can be enhanced. So, thank you for the patient listening.